You're nothing but a cripple, a burden we're forced to feed. My son's words sliced through the room like a bayonet. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't hesitate. He made sure every single person sitting around that table heard him. I could see the smirk on his face as he leaned back in his chair as if finally saying aloud what he had whispered to others behind closed doors. My wife Eleanor didn't flinch, didn't protest, didn't rise to my defense. Instead, she lowered her eyes almost in shame, though not of him, of me, as though agreeing that I had become nothing more than dead weight. My grandson giggled without understanding the weight of the insult, but the echo of that single word cripple hung over me heavier than the prosthetic strapped to my leg. I did not argue. I did not beg. I simply placed my spoon down on the table. That small metallic sound rang in my ears like the lock of a vault clicking shut. In that instant, I knew. The investigation had already begun. They thought they had won, that I was finished, that I had no fight left in me. But they had forgotten one thing. War teaches patience, and patience can be a far sharper weapon than rage. When the will was finally read, it would not be me on my knees. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Silence filled the dining room in the seconds after his words, though no one dared acknowledge it. My daughter-in-law, Melanie, leaned toward my son and whispered something, her diamond bracelet catching the chandelier's light, as though to remind me she was enjoying luxuries I had earned. My grandson stabbed at his peas with his fork, laughing at nothing, while Eleanor pushed food around her plate, refusing to meet my eyes. The roast smelled dry, the gravy bitter, but it was the taste in my mouth that sickened me most. The taste of betrayal, familiar yet still raw. I have been called many things in my life: soldier, sergeant, husband, father. I carried those titles with pride, some with duty, some with joy, but never in my years, not on the battlefield, not in the hospital when I was told I would never walk unassisted again, had I been reduced to such a word. A cripple, a burden, spoken not by an enemy, but by the very blood I once cradled as an infant. I kept my eyes on him long enough for him to feel it, but not long enough to invite another insult. Silence can be a weapon. In the desert, when a convoy was ambushed, the men who panicked died first. The ones who survived knew how to listen, how to watch, how to wait until the enemy revealed themselves. I had survived war with that lesson carved into me, deeper than the scar where my leg used to be. Tonight, that lesson would serve me again. So I waited. My gaze drifted toward the glass cabinet in the corner of the dining room where a faded photograph still hung. In it, I was 24 holes standing in uniform with Eleanor by my side. Her smile in that photograph was radiant, proud, the smile of a woman who believed in me. I remembered how her hand clung to my arm as though nothing could break me. Back then, Harold Fletcher was more than a name. He was a soldier, a protector, a man with purpose. The night everything changed was seared into me, the night an IED ripped through the earth beneath my boots. It stole my leg, but left my life a cruel trade I once believed was worth it because it meant coming home. Coming home to hold my newborn son, to kiss Eleanor's forehead, to believe that survival was enough. I thought sacrifice would be remembered. I thought gratitude would last. But memory fades. Gratitude fades faster. And sometimes family fades with it. The sound of a fork scraping against a plate pulled me back to the present. My son leaned forward, arrogance in every movement. "Dad," he said, voice dripping with entitlement. "You should really consider signing those papers. It's for the best, everyone agrees." Melanie added quickly, like a viper sliding in behind him. "We just want to help Harold. You can't manage these things anymore. It's too much for you with... You know your condition, my condition." As though losing a leg was the same as losing a mind. I met her gaze and held it. Behind that rehearsed sweetness was calculation. I'd seen the same look in corrupt officers and insurgents abroad, people who didn't see human beings, only opportunities. I leaned back, keeping my voice even. "You want the house." My son's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. That was all the confirmation I needed. I had noticed the whispers, the hushed calls that ended when I entered a room, the odd rearrangement of papers on my desk. Now the pieces began to align. But anger is a reckless ally, and I would not let them see mine. Battles are not won in the moment of insult. They are won in the quiet before the storm. so I excused myself with a politeness that grated more than defiance. "Where are you going?" my grandson asked. "Just stretching my leg," I answered, patting the wooden prosthetic as I stood. He laughed. My son didn't correct him. The hallway mirror caught my reflection as I walked away. A man gray-haired, stiff hollow around the eyes. But beneath that reflection lay something harder, sharper, the man who had survived desert shrapnel and death. That man had not died with his leg. He had only been waiting. Inside my study, I closed the door and finally allowed myself to exhale. On my desk sat a dented metal box. Inside it, I had kept documents, ledgers, letters from comrades, pieces of a chessboard I once prayed I'd never need to set again. I unlocked it with the key I always kept close. Everything was in its place, the deed to the house, copies of bank transfers, insurance papers, even letters from Arthur, my old comrade who had become a lawyer. At the bottom lay a folded flag handed to me at a brother-in-arms funeral, a reminder of why strategy matters, why patience saves lives. I touched the flag and whispered, "If they want war, they'll get one. But it'll be my kind of war." As I sifted through the papers, I noticed something wrong. The copy of my life insurance policy was gone. My heart thudded in my chest. I never misplaced it, which meant someone had been here. The lock bore no scratches. Whoever it was had either found the key or made a duplicate. That narrowed the suspects to two, my son or Eleanor. Betrayal, I realized, was already underway. This was not just disrespect. This was a strategy against me. The investigation wasn't beginning tonight. It had begun long before. I returned to the dining room, keeping my face calm. The laughter there was hollow, brittle. My son sneered. "Feel better, old man," I smiled thinly. "Better than you think." Eleanor's eyes flickered up for a second. I thought I saw guilt, or perhaps fear. I let it pass. Pressing now would only ruin the game. Instead, I ate a few more bites in silence, memorizing every glance, every smirk, every half-hidden whisper. Evidence lives in expressions as much as it does on paper. Later that night, after dishes were cleared and the house fell quiet, I returned to the study. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote 3 words at the top: plan. Then, peace. Beneath it, I listed tasks: check safe deposit box contact, Arthur install a recorder in the dining room, review will drafts. Each note was a plank laid across dark water. I capped the pen and leaned back, letting silence fill the room. Once I thought silence meant surrender. Tonight, silence became strategy. They believed I was broken, finished, a burden. They had forgotten what war taught me: patience and precision. I sat in that silence until the house creaked and the clock ticked past midnight. My leg ached, phantom pain where flesh no longer existed, but pain was an old friend. What cut deeper was knowing the enemy now wore my bloodline's face. Yet as I folded the notebook shut, I felt the calm clarity that came before battle. The first shot had been fired when my son called me a cripple. He thought it was a victory. He was wrong. It was only the opening salvo, and I was already mapping the battlefield. Sleep did not come easily that night. I lay in bed beside Eleanor, listening to her even breathing, wondering if it was real sleep or the practiced rhythm of someone pretending. I had lived long enough with soldiers to know the difference between rest and performance. Her back was turned to me, her body curled slightly away as though I were a stranger. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks like fault lines, knowing somewhere beneath them the foundation was shifting. A missing insurance policy was no accident. It was a signal. Someone had already crossed the line, and the line was drawn inside my own home. I closed my eyes and let memory take me back to a different bed, a different night. The night I returned from overseas with one leg and a lifetime of ghosts. Eleanor had sat beside me, then holding my hand as though she would never let it go. She kissed the scar, whispered that it didn't matter, that she loved me, that our family would be enough. And for a while I believed her. My son was still a boy then, maybe 10 years old, wide-eyed with questions about medals and uniforms. He had looked at me with awe. I used to think that look was permanent, carved into him the way pain was carved into me. But awe curdled into impatience, then into entitlement, and eventually into contempt. I should have seen it sooner. The first signs had been subtle. When he was in college, he'd call me only when he needed money. When I reminded him of responsibility, of service, of carrying his own weight, he would laugh and say, "That was your generation, Dad." Things are different now. I thought it was youth talking arrogance that time would temper. Instead, time hardened it into a belief. After graduation, he came home not to thank me, but to measure what could be his. The way his eyes lingered on the house, on the safe, on every piece of land I owned, it was not admiration. It was a calculation. I rolled onto my side, watching the faint glow of the street lamp spill through the curtains. My wife shifted, murmured something incoherent, then fell back into stillness. I wondered if she had been the one to open that metal box to slide the paper from its place. Was she complicit, or was she simply tired of resisting him? There is a difference between betrayal by choice and betrayal by surrender, but in the end, both cut the same. The clock struck 2, its chime muffled, but insistent. I sat up, reached for the notebook on my nightstand, and opened to the page where I had written plan, then peace. My hand shook slightly as I added a note beneath the list, confirm Eleanor's role. Approach Arthur soon. I underlined soon twice. Then I closed the notebook and forced myself to lie down again. The ache in my leg was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. Morning arrived heavy and gray. Eleanor moved through the kitchen in silence, her eyes on the coffee pot, her words few. "You didn't sleep," she said flatly. Not a question. "Neither did you," I replied. She didn't deny it. She poured 2 cups, placed one in front of me, then walked away before I could thank her. My son appeared not long after, tie crooked face, smug. "Dad, I've got a meeting. If the bank calls, just let them know I'll handle it. Don't sign anything until I'm back." He kissed Melanie on the cheek and left without looking at me, as if I were an old dog no longer worth acknowledgement. After the door shut, I sat at the table, fingers tapping against the mug. The kitchen smelled of burnt toast, but underneath was something sharper, the scent of discontent, of resentment, left to fester. I remembered a morning years ago when that same kitchen had smelled of pancakes, when my son had burst in wearing his Little League uniform, begging me to come watch his game. I had gone even on crutches, even with pain burning through me, because that was what fathers did. That boy had once wanted me in the stands. Now the man wanted me out of his way. By noon, I could no longer ignore the gnawing in my gut. I pulled on my coat, adjusted the strap of my prosthetic, and left the house without telling Eleanor where I was going. The cold air bit into me, but it cleared my head. I walked slowly down Main Street, past the barber who used to cut my hair for free when I first returned from service, past the hardware store where I had taught my son to hammer nails straight. So many places that held pieces of me, and yet none of them knew the weight of what I carried now. Arthur's office was on the corner, a modest building with a brass plaque that had tarnished with time. I pushed the door open and was greeted by the familiar creak of the floorboards. He looked up from behind his desk, gray hair, slicked back glasses perched low. His face broke into a smile that reached his eyes. "Harold," he said, standing, extending a hand. "It's been too long." We shook hands firmly. There was strength still in his grip, the kind of strength built not in gyms but in trenches. "Too long," I agreed. "I wish I had come under better circumstances." He gestured for me to sit. The chair groaned under my weight. I told him everything about the insult at dinner, about the missing insurance paper, about the whispers and the push for me to sign away what was mine. His expression darkened with each detail. When I finished, he leaned back, folding his hands. "You were right to come," he said. "You've got enemies in your own blood. But you've also got options." "What kind of options?" I asked. "First, we secure everything you own. Make sure nothing can be touched without your consent. Second, we gather proof, real proof, that your son and maybe even Eleanor are trying to undermine you. With that, you'll have leverage. Without it, you're just an old man's word against theirs." I nodded slowly. "Proof I can get. I've learned to watch to listen." Arthur's eyes softened. "You've always been a strategist. Don't let emotion cloud it. This isn't a battlefield with bullets, but the stakes are just as high." We spoke for nearly an hour, going over details, making lists, and deciding next steps. When I rose to leave, he gripped my shoulder. "You're not alone, Harold. Don't forget that. We fought together once, and I'll fight with you again. Only this time the enemy's wearing a suit instead of a uniform." His words settled in me like armor. I stepped back into the cold with renewed resolve. The town looked different now, sharper, every corner a potential clue. I returned home by a longer route, my mind replaying Arthur's advice. secure, gather, leverage. When I walked through the front door, Eleanor was in the living room folding laundry. She glanced up, then down again. "Where did you go?" she asked. "For a walk," I replied. She nodded, but her hands moved faster, folding with unnecessary precision. Something in her manner told me she already knew where I had been, or at least suspected. Trust once broken leaves shadows even in silence. That evening, as we sat in the living room, my son returned from his so-called meeting. He tossed his coat over a chair and looked at me with an expression halfway between annoyance and pity. "Dad, we need to talk about the will," he said. "It's outdated. Things have changed. You should think about what's fair." "Fair," I repeated, tasting the word like iron. "Yes," he continued. "You don't need much, just enough to be comfortable. Let the rest go to people who can use it. Me, Melanie, the kids, we'll make it work. You don't want to make things complicated, do you?" I looked at him, at the boy who once begged me to teach him how to ride a bike, who cried when he scraped his knee, who clung to me when thunder shook the house. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who saw me as an obstacle, as a wallet, as a piece of property to be managed. "Complicated," I said, quietly, "is sometimes another word for justice." He frowned, confused by my calm. "Don't be difficult," he muttered, walking away. But I wasn't being difficult. I was being deliberate. That night, after they had all gone to bed, I returned to my study. I set up a small recorder beneath the dining table, its light hidden, its presence silent. I checked the lock on my metal box again, this time placing a small piece of tape inside the latch, invisible unless disturbed. If it were opened again, I would know. I wrote another note in my book, recorder placed. Test tomorrow. Trust no one. I sat there in the dim light, listening to the house breathe. Each creak of the floorboards, each shift of pipes felt like a warning. I remembered Arthur's grip on my shoulder, his voice steady. "You're not alone." But as the night stretched on, I realized that inside this house I was. And that was exactly why I had to win. Morning crept into the house like an unwelcome guest. The pale light fell across the dining table where I had hidden the recorder, its tiny red eye invisible beneath the shadow of the wood. My leg ached from the cold, but the ache only sharpened my focus. Today would be the test. If my suspicions were true, the walls of this house would betray them before they realized I was listening. I made coffee, set the pot to drip slowly and steadily, then left deliberately early for a walk. I didn't need groceries, but I carried a bag to make the lie believable. When I closed the front door behind me, I paused on the porch, counting to 10, listening. Already I could hear footsteps in the kitchen, voices lowered but urgent. I walked down the street, heart heavy yet steady, knowing each word behind me was being captured. The walk itself was uneventful. I passed familiar shops, nodded at neighbors, and even forced a smile when Mrs. Turner asked about my health. Still breathing, I said the same answer I'd given for years, but inside I burned with curiosity. What would I hear when I returned? 2 hours later, I slipped back inside. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of quiet that follows mischief. Eleanor was folding laundry in the living room, her face calm, but her hands moved quickly, too quickly. My son wasn't home. Melanie was upstairs. I went straight to the study, locking the door behind me, and retrieved the recorder. I plugged in the headphones, pressed play, and listened. At first the scrape of chairs, the shuffle of feet, then voices muffled but clear enough. "Eleanor, he suspects something." My heart thudded. "Melanie." "Of course he does. He's not as senile as he looks. But he can't stop what's coming." My breath caught. Then my son's voice, sharper, colder. "We just need him to sign. If he refuses, we'll prove he's unfit. I've already spoken to someone about guardianship." Guardianship. The word curdled in my stomach. It was worse than I imagined. They weren't just after the house. They wanted control over everything. My money, my care, my dignity. They wanted me declared incapable, reduced to a signature in someone else's hand. I stopped the tape, my fingers trembling, then pressed play again to be sure. The same voices, the same venom. Eleanor sighs. "He's been distant lately. Maybe he already knows about the papers." My son snapped. "Then we'll make him believe it's his idea. That's the trick." I removed the headphones and sat in silence. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact captured in their own words. And the fact that Eleanor had spoken first, acknowledging my suspicion, cut deeper than the others. She was no longer the woman who kissed my scars. She was a co-conspirator. That evening dinner was another charade. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the ordinary trappings of family. My son laughed too loudly at something on his phone. Melanie passed the gravy with an almost theatrical sweetness. Eleanor kept her eyes on her plate. I ate slowly, each bite calculated, waiting for an opening. "So, Dad," my son said, dabbing his mouth with a napkin, "have you thought any more about updating your will? It'd be good to have it settled, before things get complicated." "Complicated," I repeated softly, letting the word hang in the air. "Yes, I've been thinking about that." He leaned forward, eager, and I met his eyes. Complication often reveals character. My voice was even almost gentle. Some people show who they really are when things get messy. For a moment, the table fell silent. Melanie's smile flickered. Eleanor's fork paused midair. My son frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I smiled faintly. "It means patience is a virtue, one you'd do well to learn." He scoffed, pushing his chair back. "You talk in riddles. No wonder Mom gets tired of these conversations." He stood, leaving his plate half full. The others followed soon after, leaving me alone with the remnants of a meal that had tasted of ash. Later, when the house settled, I returned to the study, pulled out my notebook, and added a new line beneath the list. They plan guardianship. Eleanor involved. I underlined the words until the page nearly tore. Then I wrote another note: "Arthur must hear this recording." The next day I carried the recorder to Arthur's office, the brass plaque on his door glinting faintly in the winter sun. He welcomed me inside, his expression tightening when he saw the device. We sat and I played the tape. His jaw clenched as the voices spilled into the room. When it ended, he leaned forward. "This is more than proof. This is ammunition." I nodded. "They mean to strip me of everything. And they think they'll succeed," he said grimly. "But they've made a mistake. They underestimated you. With this, we can not only defend your estate but turn the tables. Guardianship requires evidence of incompetence. What you've brought me shows malice, not care." I felt something stir inside me, not relief, not yet, but the faint heat of justice beginning to glow. "Keep playing along," Arthur advised. "Don't confront them. Let them think they're winning. Meanwhile, I'll prepare filings. When the time comes, we'll strike clean." I left his office with the recorder still warm in my pocket, my resolve sharper than the wind cutting through my coat. At home, Eleanor met me at the door. "You've been out a lot lately," she said, her tone light but her eyes watchful. "Walking helps the leg," I replied. She searched my face as though looking for cracks, then turned away. "Dinner will be ready soon." That night, as I sat at the table, I studied her carefully. The woman I had once loved so fiercely now felt like a stranger wearing a familiar face. Every sigh, every glance at my son, every silence seemed rehearsed. I wondered when she had crossed over, when love had curdled into complicity. Perhaps it had been years. Perhaps I had simply been too blind to see. My son raised his glass of wine. "To family," he said, his voice dripping with irony I wasn't sure he even recognized. I raised mine too, clinking gently, masking my disgust. Inside, I thought, "To enemies under my roof." Later, when the house slept, I returned again to my study. I wrote in my notebook, "Stage 2 begins. They trust their plan. I trust mine more." I looked at the folded flag, the medals, the reminders of battles fought long ago. This was a different battlefield, but the principle was the same: never strike until the target is fully exposed. Then strike hard, strike clean, and leave no doubt who had won. And so I waited, listening, recording, planning. Because the war in my house was only just beginning. The morning after I played the recording for Arthur, the house felt different. My son moved about more sharply, as if the air itself had become a battlefield. His laughter was thinner, brittle. Melanie whispered to him in corners, her eyes darting toward me like a child checking for monsters under the bed. Eleanor kept her face composed, but the tightness in her shoulders betrayed her. They thought they were in control, but suspicion had begun to gnaw at them. And suspicion, once planted, grows like wildfire. I decided it was time to water that fire. I went to the bank deliberately that afternoon, cane tapping against the marble floor as I stepped into the lobby. I shook hands with an old acquaintance, Mr. Dawson, who had once served on the town council. We spoke loudly enough for anyone near the teller line to hear. "Yes," I said, nodding. "I'll need to review the terms of transferring assets." When you're moving large sums, you want everything airtight. He smiled politely, but I saw the flicker of interest in the ears listening around us. Small towns thrive on gossip, and I had just fed them their first course. On my way out, I lingered at the bakery speaking to Mrs. Turner again. I may be making some big changes soon, I told her, keeping my tone vague but suggestive. She raised her brows, intrigued, and I knew by evening the entire street would hum with speculation. By nightfall, the whispers would reach my son. I wanted him to taste uncertainty, to feel the ground shift under his feet before he ever knew where the cracks lay. Sure enough, when I returned home, his car was already in the driveway. He was pacing the porch, phone pressed to his ear. "I don't know." He barked. "He's up to something. Just keep your end ready." He froze when he saw me, then forced a smile covering the phone. "Bank called," he said casually. "Just some paperwork. Nothing to worry about." "Of course," I said smoothly, brushing past him, cane thudding against the wood. Inside, my heart beat steadily. The seed had sprouted faster than I imagined. Later that evening at the dinner table, he tried again. "Dad, if you're moving money around, we should talk. I can help. It's complicated handling those accounts." I carved a piece of chicken, carefully savoring the quiet before answering. "Complication," I murmured, "is just another word for opportunity." "Don't you agree?" He stiffened. Eleanor's eyes flicked between us, uneasy. Melanie forced a laugh. "Harold's always been independent," she said lightly. "It's one of his strengths, or weaknesses," my son muttered, too low but still audible. I set my fork down, letting the silence stretch until it pressed against him like a weight. Then I simply picked it up again and continued eating. Silence can unnerve more than shouting ever could. The following day, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. I was at the hardware store picking up a replacement lock for my study when I ran into James, a neighbor who worked part-time at the courthouse. He hesitated before speaking, lowering his voice. "Harold, I don't know if I should say this, but I saw your son in the records office last week. He was asking about guardianship filings. Looked determined." My grip on the counter tightened. "Did he file anything?" "Not yet," James replied, but he asked questions about what it takes, what evidence is needed. He didn't look like a man just curious. I thanked him, kept my expression steady, but inside I felt the ground harden beneath me. Proof from the tape was one thing. Confirmation from outside eyes was another. My son wasn't just scheming at home, he was laying groundwork in the open, and now others had seen it. That night when we gathered again at the table, I let my words carry double meanings. "Funny thing," I said casually, "ran into James today. Always interesting what people are looking up at the courthouse." I didn't glance at my son, but I didn't need to. The fork froze halfway to his mouth. Eleanor shifted in her chair. Melanie's smile faltered. I kept eating as though I had said nothing of consequence. Later in the living room, my son cornered me. "Why are you talking to James?" "What did he say?" I looked him in the eye. "Why does it matter?" His jaw clenched. "Because people talk. They spread lies. And you're too old to know what's real." I smiled faintly. "The thing about lies, son, is that they collapse under their own weight. Truth, though, truth survives." His fists curled, then relaxed. He muttered something under his breath and stormed out, slamming the door. The sound echoed like a rifle shot in the still night. In my study, I wrote again in the notebook, "Stage 2 is effective. Paranoia rising. Outside witness confirmed. Maintain silence." I underlined the words until the ink bled through. The war was no longer silent. It was visible, audible, leaking through cracks in their facade. And yet they still believed I was the old man, broken and blind. That was their greatest mistake. The days that followed became a game of whispers. I visited the post office, deliberately asking about forwarding addresses. I spent time at the lawyer's office downtown, never revealing details, only letting people see me enter and leave. Each move was deliberate, a pebble dropped in a pond, ripples spreading outward. And every ripple found its way back to my son, who grew more agitated, more desperate. One evening as we sat in the living room, he finally broke. "Dad," he snapped, "you're not fooling anyone. People are saying things. Banks, lawyers. It's messy. Why don't you just make this simple and let me handle it?" I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. "Handle what?" "Everything," he barked. "The accounts, the property, the decisions. You don't have the strength. You don't have the clarity." "Clarity," I echoed softly. Interesting choice of words. His face reddened. Eleanor shifted as though to intervene but stayed silent. Melanie placed a hand on his arm, whispering for him to calm down. He shoved it off. "I'm tired of this dance, Dad. Sign the damn papers before it's too late." The words hung heavy in the room. I let them. Then I stood slowly, cane pressing into the carpet, and walked out without another word. Behind me their whispers clashed, angry, confused. I didn't need to hear the details. I had already won that round by refusing to engage. In the quiet of my study, I placed another tape into the recorder, ready for the next conversation. I knew tempers would boil over soon, and when they did, I would have their words, their threats, their desperation captured forever. Evidence doesn't just prove guilt, it reveals character. And my son was unraveling faster than he realized. That night, as the house grew silent, I sat at the window watching snow begin to fall outside. Each flake drifted slowly, landing softly, yet together they transformed the world. That was how my plan worked. Small actions, whispers, subtle moves, each alone insignificant, but together unstoppable. By the time my son realized the storm had arrived, he would already be buried in it. Snow still blanketed the streets the next morning, muffling the world in a hush that made every footstep echo louder than it should. I stood by the window for a long time, staring out at the yard where my grandson had once built snowmen, remembering his laughter before contempt poisoned his tongue. My hands rested on the sill, stiff with age and anger, and I realized that the house I had built with sacrifice had become a cage filled with enemies wearing familiar faces. The recorder in my study gave me evidence. The whispers in town gave me leverage. But what I needed now was something more, a true ally, someone outside these walls who would not flinch when the truth finally burst into daylight. Arthur had given me counsel, yes, but even he warned that battles are not won by lawyers alone. He said it with a half smile, as though reminding me of the old days when strategy required comrades to watch your back. I knew who I had to find. By noon, I put on my heavy coat, tightened the strap of my prosthetic, and walked to the bus stop at the corner. My son had offered, no, demanded that I give up driving months ago, but the truth was, I still could. I simply chose not to, because blending in with the everyday world of buses and sidewalks made me invisible, and invisibility is its own kind of power. The ride into the neighboring town was long, the heater rattling the faces of strangers staring out at frozen fields. I thought of the men I once rode beside in convoys, the weight of rifles across our laps, the silence before inevitable explosions. Life has a way of circling back to old rhythms. I stepped off in front of a modest workshop, its sign faded, the windows fogged from the warmth inside. The smell of sawdust and machine oil hit me as I pushed the door open. Behind the counter stood a man broader than I remembered, his hair more silver now, but his eyes sharp as ever. "Harold," he said, surprise flickering across his face before it melted into a grin. "Tom," I replied, letting his name settle in the air like a long-forgotten anthem. We shook hands, his grip still iron mine, steady despite the tremor in my bones. He had been more than a comrade. He had been the man who dragged me out of the blast zone when shrapnel tore my leg apart. Without him, I wouldn't have lived to see my son born. That debt was etched deeper than scars. "It's been too damn long," Tom said, motioning for me to sit. "What brings you here? And don't tell me it's just for old times. I can see the storm in your eyes." I sat heavily, exhaling. "You're right. I wish it were just nostalgia. But I need help." His smile faded, replaced by the seriousness of a man who had seen enough wars not to take requests lightly. "Tell me." And so I did. I told him of the insult at the dinner table, of the missing papers, of the recording I'd captured, of Eleanor's silence, of my son's growing obsession with control. I told him about James at the courthouse and Arthur's advice. With each detail, Tom's expression hardened. When I finished, he leaned back, crossing his arms. "Your own blood," he muttered. "I've seen betrayal in foxholes, but this cuts different." "It does," I admitted. "And I can't fight it alone. I need someone I can trust. Someone who remembers who I was before they started calling me a burden." "You've still got fight in you," he said firmly. "I can see it. What do you need from me? Eyes, ears, maybe muscle if it comes to that. But most of all, I need someone who won't flinch when things get ugly." He nodded slowly, then extended his hand across the counter. "Then you've got me. Always did." Our hands clasped, rough and sure, and in that grip I felt not just loyalty, but a spark of the man I used to be. We spent the afternoon in the back of his workshop, away from curious ears. He showed me a small drawer where he kept receipts, notes, and old photographs. Among them was a faded picture of us both young and defiant, grinning despite the sand and sweat. He tapped it. "That man isn't gone, Harold. He's just been quiet. Time to let him speak again." I smiled faintly. Quiet can be dangerous. That's what I'm counting on. Before I left, Tom gave me a small device, an upgraded recorder, slimmer, clearer, almost invisible. "Use this," he said. "Plant it where they can't resist talking. People like that always slip when they think no one's watching." I thanked him, pocketing the tool like a weapon. The bus ride home was darker, the fields shadowed by dusk, but inside I felt lighter, as though a weight had shifted. I wasn't alone anymore. When I stepped back into the house, Eleanor looked up from the armchair where she was mending a shirt. "Out late," she observed. "Old friend," I replied. "Needed catching up." Her hands paused for just a moment before resuming. "Friends can be useful," she murmured. It was said casually, but the undertone was sharp enough to draw blood. She suspected, maybe even knew, but I gave her nothing more. Silence remained my shield. That night, as we gathered at the table, my son was restless. He tapped his fork against the plate, his leg bouncing. "Dad," he began, "we should really set a date with the lawyer. Get things signed, squared away. No sense dragging this out." I chewed my food slowly, savoring the taste not of the meal but of his impatience. "Dragging out," I echoed, "sometimes reveals who has stamina and who doesn't." His eyes narrowed. "What are you up to?" "Up to," I repeated, feigning innocence. "Just dinner with my family." Melanie tried to ease the tension. "He only means well," she said. But the mask was slipping. I could see sweat at my son's temple, the twitch in his jaw. He was unraveling. Later, after the house quieted, I replaced the old recorder under the table with the new one Tom had given me. Sleeker, sharper, ready to catch even the faintest whisper. As I adjusted it, my fingers brushed the wood of the table, scarred with decades of meals, laughter, and arguments. This table had seen the rise and fall of my family. Now it would bear witness to their undoing. In the days that followed, I planted more seeds of doubt. A phone call was made loudly to Arthur where I mentioned transfers. A visit to the storage unit where I let the manager see me carrying boxes marked documents. A conversation at the gas station where I hinted at new arrangements. Each act was deliberate, each rumor carefully fed to the web of gossip that bound the town. By the third day, my son confronted me again. "Why are people saying you're moving money, selling property?" "Do you think I don't hear these things?" His voice cracked high with panic. I sipped my tea, the steam curling upward like smoke. "People say many things, some true, some not. The wise know which to ignore." "Stop talking in riddles," he exploded. "You're playing games and it's going to end badly." "For whom?" I asked softly. He stared at me, chest heaving, before storming out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. That night I retrieved the new recorder and played it back in my study. The voices were clear as bells. My son frantic, whispering to Eleanor, "He's hiding something. I know it. If we don't get control soon, we'll lose everything." Eleanor, her voice low, weary. "Then push harder. He won't fight back if you corner him." I sat in the dark, listening to my wife's words repeat each syllable like a nail in a coffin. She had chosen her side fully now. The woman who once vowed to stand with me against the world was instructing my son on how to finish me. I should have felt rage, but what I felt instead was clarity. When someone shows you who they are, believe them, and then prepare accordingly. I placed the tape into an envelope, sealed it, and wrote Arthur's name on the front. Tomorrow he would have it. Tomorrow another piece of the puzzle would be locked in place. As I closed the notebook that night, I wrote one final line across the page: "Allies gathered. Enemy exposed. Stage 3 approaches." Then I set down the pen, extinguished the lamp, and let the silence fill the room like armor. The house still breathed with betrayal, but I no longer felt alone. The tide was shifting, and soon, very soon, the battlefield would be mine. The envelope with the fresh recording left my hand. The next morning slid across Arthur's desk like a live grenade. He listened, brow furrowed, jaw tightening with every word of Eleanor's voice, every frantic plea from my son. When the tape ended, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "It's worse than I thought," he murmured. "They're not just circling you, Harold. They're building a case." A case, I asked, though the word already tasted bitter. He nodded grimly. Guardianship petitions aren't won by shouting at judges. They require documentation, testimony, and a narrative of incapacity. What I hear on this tape isn't idle talk, it's strategy. They'll try to prove you unfit, and once the court buys it, everything you own, everything you are, falls under their control. I leaned forward. So we need to strike first. Not loud, not yet, he cautioned. But yes, we build. We prepare. We secure every document they could twist, every account they might reach for. And we gather more evidence, enough to show intent, malice, and collusion. When the time comes, the court will see not a feeble old man, but a veteran who knew exactly what was happening under his own roof. His words steadied me like a rifle in steady hands. We spent hours drafting a plan. He pulled forms from drawers, highlighted sections with steady strokes, spoke of affidavits, notarizations, and sworn testimony. The language of law sounded sterile, but underneath it beat the rhythm of battle strategy. Evidence was ammunition. Paperwork was armor. Timing was artillery. When I left his office, the sun was low, throwing long shadows across the pavement. I carried a folder under my arm that weighed heavier than any weapon I'd held. Yet it gave me a strange sense of power. For years I had believed the battlefield was behind me. Now I saw it stretched before me again, paved not with sand, but with signatures. At home, the tension was visible the moment I stepped through the door. Eleanor looked up from the kitchen counter, her eyes flicking to the folder. "Busy day?" she asked lightly. "Productive," I replied, placing it deliberately on the table. I didn't hide it. Let her wonder. That evening, while they all moved restlessly about the house, I retreated to my study. I unlocked the metal box, added the new documents, and installed a second lock for good measure. Then I took out Tom's recorder and checked the latest capture. My son's voice again, sharper fraying at the edges. "If he doesn't sign soon, we'll push the petition. I don't care if he hates me. This is survival." Melanie's voice. "And Eleanor," he hesitated. "She'll back us. She has to." I stopped the playback, staring at the machine as though it were alive. The phrase echoed in my mind. She has to. Not wants to. Not chooses to, has to. They believed they had her bound by obligation, tethered by years of marriage. They didn't understand that loyalty under duress is not loyalty at all. It is leverage. And leverage, once exposed, turns against the hand that holds it. The next morning I met Tom again, this time in the back of the diner where the hum of conversation covered our voices. He slid a notebook across the booth. "Started keeping track," he said. "Saw your son leaving the courthouse again. Looked rattled. Talked to someone on the steps, waving his arms. Whatever you're doing, it's working." I nodded, flipping through Tom's scrawled notes, dates, times, and brief descriptions. It was surveillance, simple but effective. "This," I said, tapping the page, "is another bullet for the chamber." He grinned, sipping his coffee. "Feels like old times, doesn't it? Only difference is no sand in our boots." I smiled faintly. Different terrain, same war. When I returned home that afternoon, Eleanor was waiting. She stood in the hallway, arms crossed. "You've been out a lot lately," she said. "So have you," I replied, watching her closely. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't turn this on me. The family just wants security. You can't keep pushing everyone away." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Security isn't what you want. Control is." Her lips tightened, but she said nothing. Silence can cut sharper than knives. She turned, walking away, but her shoulders betrayed the tremor of guilt or fear. I couldn't tell which. That night, I spread the folder across my desk. Bank statements, medical reports, and notarized declarations Arthur had prepared. Among them, one document caught my eye, a medical evaluation from 2 years ago, signed by my physician declaring me fit both mentally and physically aside from the leg. Arthur had insisted on retrieving it, and now I understood why. It was proof against claims of incompetence, proof that my mind was as sharp as ever, proof that their guardianship scheme was built on sand. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal, remembering the doctor's words sharp as a tack herald. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I smiled grimly. That piece of paper would be a sword when the time came. But battles aren't won by defense alone. I needed offense. So I made a call to a friend at the local paper, an old veteran who now wrote human interest columns. I told him half-truths about legacy, about wanting to ensure scholarships for children of fallen soldiers. He agreed to draft something nothing big, just a note that the Fletcher estate might support community causes. When printed, it would plant another seed, rumors that my wealth was already destined elsewhere. rumors that would spread like fire, tightening the noose around my son's panic. 2 days later at dinner, he finally snapped. "Dad," he barked, slamming his glass down. "What the hell are you doing? People are talking, banks are whispering, even the damn paper is printing garbage about scholarships. You're letting strangers meddle in family business." I chewed slowly, set my fork down. "Legacy isn't garbage," I said evenly. "It's the only thing that outlives us." "Stop with the riddles," he shouted. "This is my future you're playing with." "No," I corrected, my voice calm as steel. "It's mine, and you've forgotten the difference." The room froze. Eleanor looked down. Melanie shifted uncomfortably. My son stared, chest heaving, then stormed out the door, rattling in its frame. In the silence that followed, I lifted my glass and took a slow sip. The war had entered open conflict. They had drawn their weapons in plain sight, and I, for the first time in years, felt alive in the fight. Later that night, I locked the folder once more, added Tom's notes to it, and wrote in my notebook, "Weapons prepared. Armor in place. Stage 4 awaits." Then I turned off the lamp, the click echoing like the chambering of a round, and let the darkness settle around me, steady and sure. The plan was no longer a theory. It was time to put pressure on the cracks I had already seen forming. I spent years learning how to wait, how to hold silence until the right moment. But war taught me something else too. Once the opening appeared, you strike fast, hard, and without apology. It began with a letter. A simple envelope, hand-delivered to the bank, copied to the lawyer's office, and most importantly left where my son would inevitably see it, lying on the hall table. Inside, nothing more than a notarized request for review of my accounts and estate planning options. Dry words on white paper, but to a man already drowning in paranoia, it was a harpoon through the chest. By evening, the storm broke. He cornered me in the living room, his face flushed, the letter trembling in his hand. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, shaking it at me. I looked at him calmly, sipping tea. "Paper," I said. "Don't play with me, Dad. You're moving things, you're talking to banks, lawyers, even newspapers. Are you trying to cut me out?" I set the cup down slowly, letting the ceramic clink against the saucer. "Cutting out," I murmured, "is what a surgeon does when something threatens the body." His mouth opened, then shut, rage twisting his features. "You think I'm a disease after everything I've done for you." The irony nearly made me laugh. "What have you done for me?" I asked softly. He faltered, then snapped, "I stayed. I'm here. You think anyone else would put up with you?" "Mom's exhausted, Melanie." He stopped abruptly, realizing he'd said too much. The silence that followed was sharper than glass. I leaned forward. "So that's what you tell yourself at night, that caring for me is a burden you nobly endure. Don't lie, son. You're not here out of duty. You're here out of hunger. And hunger never hides for long." His face turned crimson. "You're losing it. You don't know what you're saying." "On the contrary," I replied. "For the first time, I see everything clearly." He threw the letter onto the table, the pages fluttering. "You're making a mistake, Dad. You keep this up and you'll regret it." I picked up the letter, smoothed the edges, and placed it neatly back into the envelope. "The only mistake," I said, "is underestimating the man you think is finished." He stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. From the kitchen, Eleanor appeared, her face pale. "Why provoke him?" she whispered. I looked at her, my voice steady. "Because provocation reveals truth." She shook her head, retreating into the shadows of the house, leaving me alone with the hum of the refrigerator and the lingering echo of my son's anger. That night I phoned Arthur. He answered on the second ring. "You've stirred the hornet's nest," he said before I spoke. "Good," I replied. "Now we see which way they fly. Be careful, Harold. Cornered men strike wild. I've fought wild before," I reminded him. "It never ends well for the wild." The next morning the fallout spread. At the diner, I overheard whispers how Harold Fletcher might be moving his estate, how scholarships and foundations were being considered. Each whisper was a needle under my son's skin. By midday, he was on the phone, constantly voice raised, pacing the porch until even the neighbors watched with curiosity. I let the pressure mount, then tightened it further. A second letter, this one delivered by courier, marked confidential, was addressed to Arthur, but left deliberately where Melanie could spot it when she signed the receipt. By nightfall, my son was pounding on my study door. "Open it!" he shouted. I did, slowly, looking him in the eye. "What game are you playing?" he demanded. "No game," I said evenly. Just business. You're destroying this family. I raised an eyebrow. Families destroy themselves when they forget respect. I'm only making sure the ledger is balanced. His fists clenched. I swear if you go through with this. What? I interrupted, my voice cold. You'll shout louder, slam more doors, or will you finally admit the truth that all of this isn't about care or family or love? It's about inheritance, about greed dressed up as duty. He froze, the words hitting their mark. For the first time, he had no reply. The silence stretched until he spun on his heel and stormed away. Later, as I sat in the study, the phone rang. I answered, and Arthur's voice came steady. Your son called me. Angry, panicked. Said you were unstable, reckless. Tried to convince me to drop you as a client. And what did you say? I asked. I said I've known Harold Fletcher longer than he's been alive, and I don't drop allies. I felt something tighten in my chest, not weakness, but gratitude. Then it begins, I murmured. It does, Arthur agreed. But remember, the first shot always brings retaliation. Be ready. I hung up, staring at the dark window where my own reflection looked back at me, eyes sharp, jaw set. The war was no longer hidden. The first pressure had been applied, and the cracks in my son's facade were spreading. He was losing patience, losing composure, and soon he would lose control entirely. That was when the real strike would land. Before bed, I wrote in my notebook, first pressure applied, the enemy rattled, stage escalating. I closed it, set the pen down, and let the silence return. Outside, the wind howled against the house, but inside I felt calm. For the first time in years, I was not the hunted old man they thought I was. I was the hunter, patient, precise, and closer than ever to the moment when truth would break them all. The pressure was working. I could see it in the way my son moved around the house. His footsteps no longer carried the swagger of a man in control. They were fast, uneven, almost frantic. He slammed drawers looking for papers that weren't there, barked at Melanie over the phone, and left the porch light burning until dawn, like he was waiting for someone who never arrived. I didn't confront him. I didn't need to. A soldier knows when the enemy is bleeding out. They reveal themselves in their panic. One evening, as I sat quietly polishing the old silver lighter from my service days, I overheard him in the kitchen whispering furiously, "No, we can't wait that long. He's moving things. I've seen the papers. If we don't act soon, it's all gone. Do you understand?" Gone. His voice dropped lower, but not low enough. I don't care if you have to push Mom to sign. Get it done. The lighter clicked shut in my hand. My wife's name, Eleanor. He was dragging her into the storm. My jaw clenched, but I stayed silent. Timing is everything in an investigation, and now I had confirmation he wasn't just greedy, he was desperate enough to recruit others, even his own mother. Later that night, Eleanor came into my room, sitting on the edge of the bed like a girl sneaking into confession. "He wants me to sign," she whispered. I looked at her, letting the silence stretch until she shifted uncomfortably. "And will you?" I asked. Her hands twisted in her lap. "I don't know. He says it's just a precaution, that you're confused, not thinking straight." I leaned forward, my voice low. "Do I sound confused to you now?" Her eyes welled up. "No," she admitted. "But he's my son." I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly. "And I am your husband. The man who carried you across the threshold of this very house. The man who bled for this country so you could sleep in peace. If your son tells you I'm confused, remember this: I have never been clearer." She said nothing more, only slipped away into the dark hall, leaving me alone with the ache in my chest that was heavier than any wound the battlefield had given me. The next day, the cracks spread wider. Melanie showed up at the house, hair unkempt, eyes sharp with accusation. "What are you doing, Harold?" she demanded the moment I opened the door. "Do you have any idea what kind of mess you're creating? This family is torn apart because of you." "Because of me," I repeated softly. "Or because of your husband's greed?" Her jaw tightened. "Don't twist this. You've always had a way of making him feel small, like he wasn't enough. Now you're threatening to leave him with nothing. What do you expect him to do?" I let the silence hang, then asked, "And what do you expect me to do?" Smile as he empties the years of my labor. Applaud as he calls me a burden. Her face flushed, but she didn't back down. If you cut him out, you cut me out too. Is that what you want? To die alone with no family at your side? The words hit hard, not because they were true, but because they revealed exactly how little they saw me now as a bank, not a man. I stepped closer, my voice sharp. I'd rather die alone with dignity than live surrounded by parasites pretending to be kin. Her hand flew to her mouth, shock flickering in her eyes. She turned and stormed off, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. From the window, I watched her march down the driveway, phone pressed to her ear, no doubt spreading her version of the story. Good. Let them talk. Each rumor was a flare in the night illuminating the battlefield. By evening, the phone rang again. Arthur's voice carried a grim weight. Harold, it's spreading. Your son's telling anyone who'll listen that you're unstable, unfit to manage your estate. He's dropping words like guardianship and power of attorney. I closed my eyes. The oldest weapon of the greedy paint the strong as weak until they can strip them bare. Let him, I said. Every falsehood he spreads becomes a rope around his own neck. I just need you to keep the record straight when the time comes. Arthur hesitated, then said, You're gambling big, Harold, but I trust you know the cards. I hung up staring at the shadows stretching across the living room walls. Gambling, no. This wasn't a chance. This was war by patience, by precision. The following Sunday, we gathered for what was supposed to be a family dinner. Eleanor insisted on it, clinging to the illusion of normalcy. The table was laid, the roast steaming, but the air was thick with tension. My son sat stiffly, his eyes darting toward me like a predator, unsure if the prey might bite back. Melanie whispered in his ear, their shoulders brushing, their secrets pooling between them. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down with deliberate force. Dad, we need to talk about the future, he announced. I dabbed my lips with a napkin. The future is a broad subject. Be specific. He leaned forward, voice hard. Your care, your estate, the decisions that need to be made before it's too late. Eleanor flinched, whispering, Please not now, but he pressed on. It has to be now. He's moving money, contacting lawyers, and making plans behind our backs. We can't ignore it anymore. I met his gaze steadily. Behind your backs or outside your grasp? The room froze. Melanie's fork clattered onto her plate. Eleanor whispered my name like a plea, but I didn't waver. You think you're clever, my son spat, but everyone sees it, you're slipping. You can't drive, can't work, and half the time you sit in silence like a ghost. If you keep this up, the court will declare you unfit. Is that what you want? To have strangers make your choices? I set down my glass slowly, the sound deliberate. If strangers made my choices, they would still be strangers. But when family becomes the thief, that's a wound no court can heal. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Melanie exploded. Do you hear yourself? You're tearing your own son apart. He's trying to protect what's his. Protect what's his, I repeated, leaning forward. Everything at this table exists because of me. The roof over your head, the food in your mouth, the name you carry. None of it was his until I gave it. Don't you dare tell me he's protecting what's his. He's protecting what he thinks will fall into his lap when I'm gone. My son slammed his fist on the table, the dishes rattling. Enough. If you don't stop this, I'll... He stopped short, teeth grinding his threat unfinished. I stood slowly, the old ache in my leg reminding me of battles past, but my voice was steady as stone. You'll what? Raise your voice louder, spread more lies. Go ahead. Every step you take only proves my case. The room crackled with tension. Eleanor buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. Melanie muttered something under her breath, too low to catch. My son's eyes burned with fury, but behind it for the first time I saw fear. I walked away from the table without another word, the sound of my cane tapping against the hardwood like a gavel striking judgment. Upstairs, in the quiet of my study, I opened my notebook and wrote, Enemy desperate. Network fraying, truth closing in. Outside the window, the night pressed heavily, but inside me there was a clarity sharper than any blade. The climax was approaching, and soon the family that thought me broken would learn what real strength looked like. The morning after that disastrous dinner, the house felt like a battlefield after smoke had settled, silent, heavy, the air carrying the stench of something unresolved. I brewed my coffee black and strong the way I had on base years ago, and stood by the window watching the maple leaves fall. From the corner of my eye, I saw my son pacing outside on the driveway, phone pressed to his ear. His voice carried through the glass, sharp, angry, impatient. I couldn't hear every word, but fragments slipped through lawyer, guardianship, power. Soon. The words struck like distant gunfire, a warning of the attack forming. I stayed still, sipping slowly. A soldier doesn't run at the sound of bullets. He studies the angle, the distance, the timing. Later that day, Arthur came by unannounced. He had that look, the one he wore back in the day when we caught a recruit sneaking liquor into the barracks. "You're right," he said before he even sat down. "They're preparing something. I spoke to a colleague downtown. Papers are being drawn up. They want the court to declare you incapacitated." I set my mug down gently. "They think I'll fold." Arthur leaned forward, lowering his voice, though no one was around. "You need to be ready, Harold. They'll bring doctors' testimonies, neighbors if they have to. They'll say you're not fit to handle your finances, not fit to live alone." A quiet laugh escaped my lips, bitter but steady. Not fit to live alone. That's all I've ever done. Even in war, surrounded by men, you're still alone when the bullet's coming at you. If they want to fight, they'll get one, but not the kind they expect. Arthur studied me, then nodded. "Then it's time." That evening I called Eleanor into my study. She walked in hesitantly, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She hadn't been sleeping, torn between loyalty to me and fear of our son. "Sit," I said gently. She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. "They want you to sign papers, don't they?" I asked. Her lips trembled. "Yes," I nodded. "And you considered it?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "I don't know what to do, Harold. He's our son. He says if I don't help him, he'll cut me out of his life forever." I leaned forward, voice low, steady. "Eleanor, listen carefully. If he can throw away his own father for money, what do you think your signature will buy you? Do you think loyalty can be purchased with ink on a page? No. It will only show him that betrayal works. And once you teach a man betrayal works, he'll never stop using it." She began to cry softly, hands covering her face. For a moment, I reached across the desk, resting my palm over hers. "I don't want to fight you," I whispered. "But if you choose his side, you choose to see me buried alive." Her sobs deepened, but she didn't answer. She left the room moments later, shoulders trembling. I sat back, staring at the shadows dancing across the walls, knowing the choice she made in the next few days would shape the battlefield. By the weekend, the confrontation came. I was in the living room, flipping through the old military journal I kept when the front door banged open. My son stormed in with Melanie at his heels, both of them tight with determination. Eleanor trailed behind, her face pale. "Enough games, Dad," my son barked. "We're done waiting." I closed the journal carefully, placing it on the table. "Is that so?" He slammed a folder onto the coffee table. Papers spilled out, legal documents stamped and official. "Guardianship petition. We're filing on Monday morning. By the end of the month, you won't be able to move a dime without my approval." Melanie crossed her arms, chin lifted. "It's for your own good. You're not the man you used to be. You can't even manage simple things anymore. You'll thank us one day." I looked at Eleanor, who stood silently, avoiding my gaze. "And you?" I asked her softly. "Do you stand with them?" She flinched, tears brimming in her eyes, but said nothing. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You think you've already won?" My son smirked. "We're not thinking, Dad. We know." A silence stretched heavy and suffocating. Then I leaned forward, my voice cold and precise. "Do you know what I learned in war, that arrogance is the last step before defeat? You assume because you have papers. After all, you have noise that you've cornered me. But while you've been busy drawing up documents, I've been documenting you." His face twitched. "What are you talking about?" I tapped the journal on the table. "Every call, every visit, every word you've spoken in this house about my incapacity, about forcing signatures, about money. Arthur has heard them. The lawyer has copies. By the time you stand in court, the judge won't be asking if I'm fit. He'll be asking if you're fit to inherit a penny." For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. Melanie's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Eleanor gasped softly, covering her mouth. I stood slowly, the weight of my leg heavy but my posture unbroken. Leave this house. Take your papers with you. Monday morning will come soon enough. We'll see whose truth the court believes. The silence that followed was suffocating. My son gathered the papers, roughly shoving them back into the folder. His jaw was clenched so tight the veins in his neck bulged. Without another word, he stormed out, Melanie chasing behind. Eleanor lingered for a moment torn, then followed them, leaving me alone in the stillness. That night I sat in the dark, the only light coming from the small desk lamp. I wrote in my notebook, enemy exposed, documents revealed, court imminent, hold position. My hands shook slightly, not from fear but from anticipation. Decades of discipline had led me to this moment when patience would finally crush arrogance. Days passed with a strange quiet. The phone rang less. The house felt emptier, as if the storm had retreated only to gather strength elsewhere. But I knew what was coming, and I was ready. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in my old suit. The fabric was a little tight now, but it carried the scent of dignity. Eleanor waited by the door, her hands wringing. "Harold," she whispered, "please, don't make this ugly. He's still our son." I looked at her, weary but unshaken. "Eleanor, what's uglier, truth in the light or lies in the dark?" She had no answer. Arthur pulled up in his car, giving me a steady nod as I climbed in. We drove in silence, the courthouse looming ahead like a fortress. Inside, I could already see them waiting, my son Melanie, their lawyer. Their eyes glittered with the confidence of people who think the world bends to paperwork. But I wasn't walking into their trap. They were walking into mine. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and stale air, a mix of dignity and decay. I gripped my cane as Arthur walked beside me, each step steady despite the heaviness in my chest. Years of service had taught me one truth: a battlefield is a battlefield, whether bullets or words. This one required discipline of silence, not firepower. We entered the courtroom. My son sat tall in his suit, Melanie beside him, their lawyer shuffling papers with an oily grin. Eleanor was there too, wringing her hands, her face pale, trapped between two worlds. When my son's eyes met mine, he smiled, not with warmth, but with triumph. He thought this was already decided. The judge, a stern woman with sharp glasses, adjusted her files. This hearing is to consider the petition for guardianship over Mr. Harold Walker, age 71. Her voice cut cleanly. "Petitioners, please proceed." Their lawyer rose first. His words flowed with rehearsed polish. He painted me as unstable, forgetful, incapable of handling my own affairs. He cited statements of neighbors, selective anecdotes, twisted memories. As he spoke, my son nodded solemnly, playing the part of the concerned heir. Melanie dabbed her eyes with a tissue as if tragedy draped her shoulders. I sat still, hands folded over my cane. Patience, timing, wait for the opening. When the lawyer finished, the judge turned to me. "Mr. Walker, do you have representation?" Arthur stood. "Your Honor, I represent Mr. Walker." He spoke plainly, firmly. "And we contest the petition." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Arthur gestured to me. "Your Honor, before we discuss capacity, I'd like to submit evidence." He lifted a folder, the one we had prepared. Inside were transcripts, recordings, and notes. Every cruel word, every plot, every manipulation my son had whispered, thinking no one was listening. Arthur's voice grew sharper as he read. Exhibit A. Petitioners, stating, quote, "We'll push him until he signs. If not, we'll take it to court. He won't last long anyway." Exhibit B. Phone logs with threats of financial coercion. Exhibit C. Witness statements confirming the petitioner's disgust, removing Mr. Walker not for his welfare but for his estate. The courtroom shifted. The lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised her hand. Overruled. Continue. My son's face reddened. Melanie whispered frantically to him. Eleanor looked as if the floor had vanished beneath her feet. Then Arthur turned to me. "Mr. Walker, would you tell the court about your daily life?" I rose slowly, leaning on my cane, letting the silence stretch before speaking. "Your Honor, I cook my meals, I write every day. I manage my accounts, my appointments. I read the paper cover to cover. I may walk with a limp, but my mind has never limped a single day. The only thing incapacitated here is my family's sense of honor. Gasps stirred in the gallery. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Walker, can you demonstrate your financial competence? I slid a document from my coat. This is my current portfolio. Balanced, diversified. Every figure was checked last week. Not by a broker, by me. She studied it, her brow softening, then looked at my son. Do you contest these figures? He stammered, his bravado cracking. We didn't know. The judge's voice hardened. It appears you did not know much at all except how to manipulate. The lawyer scrambled. Your Honor, we only acted out of concern. Concern, the judge snapped. Concern does not sound like plotting inheritance before a man is even in his grave. Silence. My son's eyes darted downward, shame creeping into the cracks of arrogance. Then came the twist I had saved for last. Arthur handed the judge a sealed envelope. She opened it, scanning the words, her eyes narrowing, then widening. This, she said slowly, is a will. Executed, notarized, and valid. She looked at me. Would you care to explain? I steadied myself. Yes, Your Honor. While they spent months preparing to bury me alive in paperwork, I prepared my own. This will reflect my decision, not theirs. And it reflects exactly who deserves what. Melanie's face drained of color. My son shot up. What? You can't sit down, the judge ordered sharply. Arthur spoke. In this will, Your Honor, Mr. Walker has safeguarded his estate. His son, Arthur, paused deliberately, is left nothing. The entirety has been assigned to a trust benefiting charitable causes for veterans with secondary provisions for his wife Eleanor contingent upon her independence. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, outrage. My son slammed his fist on the table. You can't do this. I'm his son. I faced him calm, every word cutting clean. Blood makes you my son, but actions decide if you're my heir. You chose greed. You chose betrayal. And in doing so, you chose nothing. His mouth open-closed, rage boiling. Melanie grabbed his arm, panic flashing in her eyes. Eleanor sobbed quietly, but I could see in her tears not only sorrow but release, the recognition that the chains of silence had finally broken. The judge struck her gavel. Order. This court denies the petition for guardianship. Furthermore, I recommend the petitioners be investigated for attempted exploitation. My son collapsed into his chair, pale sweat beading his forehead. Melanie stared straight ahead, her mask shattered. As the session ended, I rose, cane steady, heart steady. Arthur clasped my shoulder. You did it, Harold. I shook my head slightly. No, truth did it. Outside, the autumn air struck my face crisp and clean. Eleanor walked beside me slowly, her eyes swollen from tears. She whispered, I'm sorry. I paused, looking at her. Eleanor, sorry isn't enough to erase what almost happened. But maybe it's enough to start over. The question is, which side do you want to stand on now? She said nothing, only nodded faintly, and for once I let silence answer. As Arthur drove me home, I gazed out the window at the streets rolling past. My son's voice still echoed in memory. You're nothing but a cripple. But now the echo no longer stung. It had become a reminder. I wasn't the cripple. I was the survivor, the investigator, the soldier who fought not with bullets but with patience and truth. And in the end, when the will was read, it wasn't me on my knees. It was him. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.